স্টার্ট করছি তাহলে।
হ্যাঁ, স্টার্ট কর।
Okay, so good evening everybody. Welcome back to the Airwise session. So we are starting from today. We are starting the new session of ARY West Bengal chapter, that is the Journal Club Pro and Journal Club Light session. I hope everybody will like it and it will be beneficial to all the residents. So without further delay, I would like to call upon the first speaker today, as none other than Dr. Abhishek Basu, our beloved senior and a great teacher. So he is going to talk about the introduction to Journal Club and how to do the Journal Club, actually what it is all about. And I think it will be extremely beneficial to all of you, and we are going to learn a lot from him. So Abhishek, please, please and start.
Thank you so much, Jibok. And again, I would like to thank ARY West Bengal for organizing this. So we have been talking for a very long time how to innovate ourselves in the times of this pandemic. And one of the important suggestions that came up as a consensus was to have a journal club. Now, there are a few reasons why we need to have a journal club, and I'll come to that in the course of my short presentation. But I would just like to reiterate that journal club is something which is very inherent to the ethos of postgraduate teaching, and especially in a subject like oncology, which is rapidly progressing. It is very important that we keep ourselves abreast with the evidence that is emerging, past as well as the future evidence that keeps on accumulating, and thereby this journal club needs to be done. Now, the to-do list of my presentation would be uh, why we need to have a journal club, which I just discussed, and I'll come to it in slightly more detail later. And the next part would be how to prepare a journal club. I have a very clear disclosure before I even start on the details that this presentation is meant exclusively for residents. I have absolutely no intention of trying to teach the seniors or the consultants how to do a journal club, who are more than aware of that. But I think that from my personal experience, residents across different institutions, whether it is government or corporate, do not unfortunately have the adequate exposure to the journal club, mainly because of the logistic reasons that are prevalent over the past 1.5 years. And thereby, I thought that this would be slightly important as we go along. So what I would essentially do is go through the steps of how to make a journal club very, very simply, with a practical example of a paper, which is very important to all of us. So as we move to the first part of the presentation as to why we need to do a journal club, now this is a graph that is very familiar to all of us. Is essentially the exponential decay and the exponential growth curve, but I have also taken the liberty to tweak it a little bit and have shown it to you, those who have been following my presentations previously several times before. So this is essentially what keeps on happening. The published data keeps accumulating, and as you grow older, especially, and your clinical entanglements become more and more, you have less and less reading time, and this leads to something which is not quite good but is there nevertheless, and that is a knowledge practice gap. Ideally we should be somewhere here, but this is practically not possible, because if you look across, you'll see that major journals in oncology, whether they're radiation or clinical oncology, publish almost every month, which means an average of around 20 odd articles published every month across maybe around 20 journals, which is 400 just here. And there are articles now being published online ahead of print, which makes it an astronomical figure. And thereby it is important that we tweak out important articles which might be potentially practice changing, and look at it regularly to keep ourselves updated. Now, when we were discussing or formulating this journal club concept for AROI, at the very beginning, we understood that we had to do this at two different levels. For the junior members, it is more important to know the important publications or manuscripts that have paved the way of how we treat patients. Essentially, the cornerstones of the evidence-based medicine that we practice, not essentially that they need to be within the last couple of years. They could be even 10, maybe 20 years old, but nevertheless are very, very important. They are present in the standard textbooks that you read and are often asked by your examiners in your examination. So for that, we conveniently came out with what we call as a Journal Club Lite, with no disrespect meant to the juniors, of course. But at the same time, we also thought that we needed some fodder for our brains. So we needed to learn ourselves and keep ourselves updated as to the astonishing amount of new evidence that keeps on being published. And therefore, for the senior members, we had a concept called a Journal Club Pro. Now, as is shown in this figure, there is no watertight compartment between these two. So the junior members are free to participate in the Journal Club Pro, as are senior members. If they are willing, they can always revisit the old or the very, very important but practice changing manuscripts that will be discussed in the Journal Club Lite. Now, just to take this matter a little bit further, the Journal Club Lite will essentially be for JRs and SRs, and by the JRs and SRs at a very sometime down the line. So initially, probably we will be helping you out a little bit, but what we want is that from JR2s, JR3s and the SRs, you come and you actually present the journal clubs like you do in your departments, like you're supposed to do. And we would hope and we would consider that at this point, they would be mentored by the faculty, preferably from the institution or from AROI, in doing their preparations for this journal club. So as I already said, this would be practice changing evidence, and the focus for Journal Club Lite would be on single articles. So we would not be discussing too much so that you don't get confused, but have the basic concepts of the important trials that are important. And as we go along, you will update yourself, and you will of course also be part of the JC Pros. So the core ideas of this would be to read a manuscript properly, to have a critical appraisal of the manuscript, and then to also have a presentation and how to prepare a presentation of a journal club. As opposed to this, for the Journal Club Pro, which would be for the relatively senior members of the faculty and consultants, the presentations here would mainly be by the SRs and the junior consultants, but of course, seniors who are willing to be a part of this actively in doing presentations and acting as discussants are more than welcome. Here, as we said, we would be discussing cutting edge recent evidence that has been published. So there is no cutoff for recent evidence. We have had a couple of queries regarding this. So that would completely be determined by the condition. And here it might be so that we are doing a JC Pro in one day. We might be actually discussing a trial related to prostate cancer and another related to CNS in the same day, simply because these two trials have actually had a huge impact on the discussions in the last maybe couple of months. There would also be, and this is very important for the JC Pro, cross-trial comparisons and discussions, as you would very soon find out in the Rapido trial that would be discussed by my colleague, Dr. Onupam. Again, there would be critical appraisal, but more in-depth analysis, including the statistics and the clinical approach and the endpoints and the results of the trial. And we would also be debating controversial and gray areas which are important in clinical practice for us. So coming back to the main topic that I am going to discuss today. So essentially my talk would be a JC Lite followed by a JC Pro by Onupam. So before we begin, it is important to know again why the journal club is required. Now, this is very, very important to appreciate, particularly for residents, that there is a basic difference in the curriculum of the undergraduate and the postgraduate levels. In the undergraduate, it is more of didactic teaching directly from the books, and there is not much stress, unfortunately, in at least our part of the world, on evidence. But as we move to post-graduation, it is not only important for us to know the hypothesis or the reason. For example, let me give you a practical example. So if you are asked that why do you give, or rather you know that in high-grade gliomas, the standard treatment after maximal safe resection is radiotherapy with temozolomide, but it is not sufficient to know only that. It is also sufficient to know why this treatment has been there and why it has evolved. So there was surgery alone at one point of time, then radiation, and then there was an evidence which changed practice completely and has been the cornerstone for the more than 1.5 decades now. So you need to know this evidence both for the sake of your own practice as well as for your examination. So this is the difference that you have in the postgraduate curriculum. Again, speaking very officially, this is something that is included in your syllabus according to the erstwhile MCI and the National Medical Commission guidelines. And you look into your log books, you'll understand that you have a substantial amount of journal clubs that you will have to fulfill. So that is something that we thought was important as we designed this JC Lite. Now, before you start, you need to have a couple of do's and don'ts about the paper that you are going to discuss. So when you go ahead and start reading a manuscript, you need to have a very open mind, whether it is your own manuscript or your peers or a manuscript that you are reading as a part of your knowledge building part. So you read the paper well. If required, you read it more than once, maybe 2 or 3 times. To understand the perspective of the paper, we'll come to it in a moment, and the research, hypothesis, and methodology, you try to interpret the results, and for that you need to, of course, have a working knowledge of biostatistics, which I hope most of you who have done the biostatistics module of AROI would be in a better position to do. And you also need to read between the lines, because not everything is mentioned in the manuscript, and you need to apply your intelligence in that. What are the don'ts? You should not be judgmental either way. Because it has been written by somebody whom you look up to, it doesn't mean that the paper is sacrosanct. On the other hand, you should not belittle something simply because it is coming from somebody whom you do not like or from an institution which you think is not up to the mark. Very, very importantly, you should not copy and paste. And this is unfortunately something that we keep reiterating, because there is a tendency among residents, especially, to do that while you are doing your presentations. So you, of course, have to copy and paste when you are doing a journal club, because there are things from the paper that you need to look at. It's not your own assumption that you are putting here, but you have to do that only after you've understood why you are doing it and how you are doing it. Please do not jump to conclusions regarding the paper before you have gone through it entirely. And please do not forget to cite not only the paper that you are doing, but also other papers that come in between while you are doing it. I'll show you examples of this. And typically, as a working hypothesis, the presentation should not ideally be more than 15 slides, excluding the title slide and the last slide. The 3 cardinal steps then of preparation would be to read the manuscript first, interpret the manuscript, and then prepare the presentation. Now, the most part of my presentation that I will do today would concern steps 1 and 2, and I have just 1 or 2 slides regarding the preparation part at the end. So the components of the paper, as we know, include a title, a summary or abstract, an introduction, background, materials and methods, results, discussions, and conclusions. The title is basically something which is important to us because it gives you an idea of what the paper is all about. Now, for JC Lite, it would be, as I already talked about, that we would be providing, the we means the senior faculty or on behalf of AROI, we would co-opt and we would provide the particular resident the paper or choose it on your behalf. For the pro concept, we actively invite participation of the senior members to come up and tell us which papers they think should be discussed. So because now we are discussing JC Lite, so we would give you that publication, and you need to know the journal and where it was published, because that is important, as we have discussed previously, and also the author's background info. So who was the author, what was the institution, whether it was a single institutional or a multi-institutional study. And just a touch about citation here, because although it is also important for references, it is important. So just to talk about this, so typically, and this is following the AMA or the Vancouver style, which is most common. So you have the first 3 authors followed by the et al., which is an Italian for and others, the name of the particular paper, the standardized PMC abbreviation for the journal, the year of publication, the volume, and the page numbers. So this is important, and we keep on repeating this I think sometimes at the cost of being boring, but this is so important that it is important that most of the residents or all of the residents know how to properly do a citation when you are looking at any aspect of your research. The summary or abstract is something which is typically not included when you are preparing the journal club presentation, but nevertheless, you should read it. Unfortunately, because of restrictions of availability of papers, you sometimes do not have access to the full paper and you only have the abstract. Please don't be worried about this, because when a particular paper will be chosen for JC Light, we would be in a position to provide you the paper. And this, as you know, is basically the first impression that you get from the paper, but this is less important for a journal club. So let us now give us the residents an example of a particular paper, which I think is very important for all of us. When I was a resident, this was a paper that was important. It still is very important, although it has been published more than 15 years ago now. So this is the paper that I will be using as an example at every step, just to harp on how you can do a very basic journal club as a resident. So this is the first or the title slide that you do. You can write down the name of the paper, or you can directly have the name of the paper along with all the main authors and the citation where it was published. Sometimes, and this is certainly not compulsory, you could also look up the particular person. Here it is Professor James Bonner from Birmingham, Alabama, who is a very, very renowned oncologist. And just on a lighter note, it is sometimes important to have a look at these men and women, because if you are attending AROI quizzes by Dr. Onupam, he might actually sprout up a question on them. Coming to the next part, which is the background or the introduction of the paper, essentially and very basically, this is what happened before the paper was written. So this is what is the perspective of the paper. And this essentially summarizes why the new treatment or the hypothesis of this was formulated. So there must have been some lacuna in the existing treatment, or the existing treatment was present, but it was increasingly toxic, or there was some new understanding of the disease that was gained in terms of the molecular level or clinical level after the previous standard of care was there. And this essentially is a very good summary before you go ahead with the main publication. If you look at the most modern journals now, you would find that they have a very interesting part, which is known as a systematic review. Now, this is not a systematic review in the sense of a single publication, but what the good journals now encourage is that when you want to publish a paper, you must actually look at the context, and you must go through standard searches in the search engines and come out with what is there. And this is taken from actually the RTOG 0617 study for lung as an example, just to show you that how many papers they have gone through and what they have found before they have actually gone on for the concerned paper. Coming back to the paper that we are discussing, this was essentially concerning the treatment of locally advanced head and neck squamous cell carcinomas. And we know that the treatment evolved from surgery to radiotherapy, and over time, the addition of chemotherapy, which led to benefit. At the same time, there was also altered fractionation, which happened to improve the control over standard conventional radiotherapy. However, there were concerns, and these concerns were toxicities, which were often prohibitive because of the principal drug that was used, which was cisplatin. At the same time, it was also found that there was insights into the biology of head and neck cancer, and it was found that EGFR expression is pretty high in many of these cancers, and a drug which was IgG1 monoclonal antibody to the EGFR was discovered. Therefore, in preliminary studies, it was found that this drug showed benefit when it was used concurrently with radiation, and thereby it was thought that combining this with radiation would be of some help. Coming to the next part of the paper, which is materials and methods, this is basically the heart of the paper, and essentially it summarizes the patients, that is the IE criteria, the trial schema. I'll come to it in a moment, and this is something that you would have to actually prepare when you are doing the journal club, the statistical modeling and interpretation, and the study endpoints. It is also important to look at something called trial oversight, and I'll just come to this in a moment when you're reading the paper. So let me give you a practical example. This is from another study. study of chemotherapy in breast cancer, nevertheless, but just to show you how a proper materials and methods is written. And this is the phase of reading the paper, not doing the journal club. So first you look at what was the study period. Then you look at what was the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the paper, which is given clearly here. You then look at the methodology section as to what treatment was administered in the different arms of the study, if it is multicentric or even if it is single center. You also look at the trial oversight, which means essentially what were the institutions that were involved, how did they collaborate, was there an independent data monitoring committee, what was the ethical considerations that were followed, who was the trial sponsor if there is something. And certainly then you also look at the statistical analysis, which concerns two important things. If it is required, the stopping criteria, where criteria are there within the paper which tells you that after certain time you actually look at evaluating the study and then considering whether it should continue or should not continue, and also looking at the power of the study and the level of significance or the alpha value of the study, which is given by the p value, what was considered. So this is also important when you are looking or reading the paper before you go ahead and make the presentation. Let us come back again to the paper that we are discussing and look at the materials and methods section. So it had a key inclusion criteria of stage 3 or 4 non-metastatic, that is not stage group 4C, measurable squamous cell carcinoma of the oropharynx, hypopharynx or larynx, medical suitability for radiation, KPS more than 60 with normal blood parameters. Key exclusion criteria were previous cancer or chemotherapy, surgery or radiotherapy for the head and neck cancer. It was a phase 3 multicenter randomized control trial, used cross-sectional imaging and a complete ENT evaluation, including pan-endoscopy, and routine PEGs were recommended. So this is the trial schema. Now, this is perhaps one of the most important slides that you will prepare when you are doing the journal club presentation, and do not make it in haste. This is very, very important because you need to look at the IE criteria first, then how the patients were randomized, what was the allocation ratio, which should be clearly mentioned here, the two arms with details of what was done, what was the primary endpoint here, it was the duration of locoregional control, and what were the secondary endpoints. In this trial, it was PFS, OS, ORR, and safety. And very importantly, what were the stratification factors which were predetermined in the trial. So the KPS score, the nodal and T staging, and importantly, as we'll discuss later, the RT fractionation. It was also seen how cetuximab was given. So there was a loading dose given 7 days prior to the initiation of radiation, followed by weekly doses that were administered during radiotherapy. And this is something, again, which needs to be clearly mentioned. Coming to the treatment profile, radical radiation was given over 7 to 8 weeks. And the fractionation was by the choice of the principal investigator. I'll just show you this in a moment. Uninvolved nodal areas were given the standard microscopic dose and escalated to 60 gray if there was higher nodal burden. Maximum 2 5-day treatment breaks were allowed, and importantly, radiotherapy QA protocols as per the RTOG criteria prevalent at that time were used. And this is important, although largely the method of treatment was 2D in this trial. So there were 3 fractionation schedules that were used, including the conventional, hyperfractionation, and the concomitant boost, and the details are mentioned here. And when you are doing a trial like this, as Anupam will show you in a minute in the Rapido trial, which had differences both in chemotherapy, radiation as well. So you need to mention each in detail in the methodology section when you are doing the presentation. Coming to the statistics, the evaluation was, of course, by intent to treat analysis, and the duration of locoregional control, which was the primary endpoint, was defined as the time from randomization to the first documented progression or recurrence of locoregional disease or death from any cause. The combined treatment with cetuximab was hypothesized to yield a 1-year locoregional control of 57% or greater, compared to 44% with RT alone, and this was from historical data. So this is exactly how you calculate the sample size, taking into consideration the prevalence of the disease, from the historical data, what is your expected control in the standard of care arm, and how much incremental benefit you actually hypothesize, and based on that, what would be the level of significance for testing the hypothesis and the power of the study. I'm not going into the statistical details of this because we have had excellent presentations separately for all of this, but just to keep in mind that for this particular trial, the study had 90% power and the level of significance was 5% with a two-sided log rank test. Coming back to how you read the results now. So we have completed the background and the materials and methods. Now we come to the results part. So when you study the results, they're essentially divided into, the first part is the trial period and the median follow-up, which is very important. Then you look at the baseline demographic characteristics, then the efficacy endpoint summary, the toxicity endpoint summary, and then the other endpoints. So it is important that you know how to interpret the different graphs, especially things like the Kaplan-Meier, which have again been explained to you previously. And you also look at what are the different types of endpoints that are being used, what is the gradation system that is being used, and you need to have a working knowledge of how to interpret all of this. Now, it is impossible for me to reiterate or go back and again tell you what the different types of things are, but just I'm borrowing a couple of slides from a previous presentation that I made during the statistics workshop, just to show you how it is important to look at interpreting a Kaplan-Meier curve. And just to show you what are the components of a curve. So when you look at a Kaplan-Meier curve, you first look at what it is showing. In this case, it is progression-free survival. Whether it is investigator assessed or centrally assessed by the independent radiological review. What is the percentage of maturity, meaning how many events have actually taken place at the time when the manuscript was published. You also look at the number of events that have actually occurred in both the arms. You look at what are the median times of that particular endpoint. So these are time to event analysis. So what was the median endpoint? Often you would not have the median endpoint because 50% of the events would not have occurred. Then you would be looking at something like a time cutoff. So you would be looking like something like a 3-year PFS or a 5-year PFS, but that would occur in certain cases. You would then look at what would be the hazard ratio, meaning what would be the quantum of proportional difference between the two arms that were being shown here. You actually look at the level of significance. And when you are interpreting the curves physically, you look at the starting of the curves, whether there is an early separation or there is not. Then you look at the median time, that is 0.5, and how the curves have separated. And after that, you actually look at the difference at that point. But not only that, what is very, very important is to look at the tail of the curves. So when the curves have actually separated, and what happens to the number of patients who were there or censored at the last time when this analysis was done. So this is important, how you interpret the Kaplan-Meier curve. I've just taken the liberty of choosing this and a forest plot as an example because it's not possible within this presentation to show you everything, but you need to know this before you actually start doing a journal club presentation where you will be showing these curves. So this is again a forest plot, which you know is important for subset analysis. Remember, subset analysis can again be of two types, pre-planned or post-hoc. Post-hoc analysis inherently are weaker than the pre-planned analysis, which are done or which are within the gambit of the trial design. So just to show you a couple of points here, you see that this is most of the subsets actually favor this treatment. And this would not always be the case, where in some cases you would find that this would cross the line of unity and go to the other side. But just to show you another important aspect, which I think is often missed, that is the quantum of benefit and the width of the confidence interval. So you see here not only is the point estimate important, but also the width of the confidence interval. Again, when you sometimes look at a very wide confidence interval, it is important also to look at the absolute number of patients in that particular subset, because if it is less, inherently the confidence interval tends to be wide. So just because a particular subset has a wider confidence interval, you should not blanketly reject what you are seeing here. It might be because there are less number of patients. So these are things that are practically important when you are reading. Let us again come back to the Bonner's trial, which we were discussing. So between April 1999 and March 2002, more than 400 patients from 73 centers across the United States and 14 other countries were randomly assigned into the two arms. The treatment groups were well balanced, and this is the standard thing that is mentioned. I'll just show you in a moment the baseline characteristics. The compliance was also well balanced, with 44% of the patients being treated as stipulated, 31% having treatment with minor variations, and only 12% patients relief treatment with acceptable major variations. Now, this is very important, especially for radiotherapy trials, because you need to look at the quality assurance purpose. This is less important for medical oncology trials, but I just thought that this is something which I needed to show. So you can see the baseline characteristics along with the p-values compared in the two arms by age, sex, KPS, site of the primary tumor, the stage grouping, the T and the N status, etc. Coming to the efficacy summary, which is the next point of this trial, the median duration of locoregional control, remember, which was the primary endpoint, was 24 months compared to 14 months with the radiotherapy alone. So an improvement of 10 months, which translated into a hazard ratio of 0.68 with a confidence interval, 95% confidence interval 0.52 to 0.89, which I would say is more or less narrow. At a median follow-up of 54 months, this is again important, it's a pretty robust follow-up for head and neck cancer. There was a median survival of 49 months versus 29 months. So an improvement here of 20 months, which is a secondary endpoint nevertheless, which was also statistically significant. We come to the efficacy endpoints, which are tabulated here, but I'd just like to show you one thing which I would come in discussion later. This is important. You look at this part, which shows you the median duration of radiotherapy regimes, so the different radiotherapy regimes, and you would see an interesting point here. If you look at the conventional fractionation, the hazard ratio is actually bordering on unity, which means that there is not much difference between the two arms here. And if you look at the altered fractionations, especially the concomitant boost, you would see that the quantum of benefit appears to be more. So this is something that is an interesting throw from this very, very important trial, which unfortunately is not often clearly discussed or written in textbooks. Coming to the Kaplan-Meier curve, so this is the primary endpoint locoregional control, which I have talked about, and I have already told you how to interpret. So you can see that there is pretty early separation of the curves. And as we go along, it appears that the quantum of benefit actually increases among them. And you can see, I've already told you about the absolute differences. This is the overall survival of the curves. There was an updated overall survival that was actually presented later, but not published as a full paper. When you are presenting a particular trial, you also need to be abreast of later versions of the same trial being published. So when you do a literature search, also look out for that. It may be that 10 years down the line, a 10-year follow-up of the particular trial has been published. So sometimes that is also important. Coming to the toxicity summary, obviously the two important toxicities of this drug, which even residents know, were acneiform rash and infusion-related events because it was a chimeric antibody. Notably, however, cetuximab did not exacerbate the common toxic effects associated with radiotherapy, and there were not severe late effects, which are more important to us as radiation oncologists. Again, you need to show the entire adverse events when you are presenting a journal club, irrespective of whether they are significant or not. So many residents have this thought block, even while they are doing their own dissertations, that only significant values need to be shown or need to be discussed. This is completely wrong. Whether it is efficacy or it is toxicity or it is any other endpoint, you need to show a particular journal verbatim, if I may use that word. So it's exactly how it has been published. Without the only point where you would come in, I'll show you later, is where you take a critical appraisal part in the discussion and the limitations of the trial, not before. So till that point, you have to just show what is there within the trial without making any comment. You have to be absolutely neutral, so as to speak. So these are the efficacy, the toxicity endpoints here. Now coming to the last and perhaps the most important and least read part of any publication, which is the discussion and conclusion. Now, by least read, I am here again referring mostly to residents, because generally there is always the tendency to look at first the abstract and then the figures in the particular publication if you have the full text. Very few times I know, because myself, when I was a resident, I also had this tendency not to read the full paper, and especially the discussion, which seemed very boring. However, this is the author's own perspective of the trial. So the author here tells you what he or she or the group thinks about the publication. And if the authors are being honest, they would actually tell you not only the strengths, but also the limitations of the trial, which is very, very important. And also they would try to put the paper in perspective of the existing literature. So you would want to know how this particular trial has actually contributed to the literature that existed and why it is so important. So if somebody asks you about the Bonner's trial, you would also want to know why you have read and why you are being given the task to present this as a journal club. So I'll just take an example to show you here. I'll come to Bonner's trial in a minute, but just to show you the discussion part of perhaps one of the best written manuscripts that I have come across of, again, another seminal trial. And this is the trial of the radiotherapy plus temozolomide that I reflected from Professor Roger Stoop. So in the beginning, the discussion talks about the basis. So what was the basic treatment? Then they talk about the trial findings and why they are important. So what was discovered during the course of the trial? Then they come to the strengths of the trial. And bear in mind, the strengths part is written here and the limitations is written here. So this is an honest group that is actually telling you that the limitations outnumber the strengths. So no, this does not mean that the trial is not important. It certainly is, and it has been practice changing, as we have discussed. But the limitations must be clearly discussed. And when you are writing or rather you are making the presentation, you need to be very careful that you look at the limitations. You might at a later point of time, if you are confident, go ahead and add limitations to what has already been discussed, because some limitations might not have been discussed within the paper, but you need to put those up. There might be accompanying articles which are of importance published along with or during this. And this is, as you will come to the next presentation, I think Anupam will show you a huge number of other articles which are important to the article that he will be presenting. It is also important to look at, if you are using particularly a new treatment or a new drug, whether there have been additional concerns of toxicity and how these can be mitigated, and this need to be discussed before you come to conclusions, and very importantly, future directions. So if you have got a new standard of care that you are trying to sell as the best treatment at this point of time, you also need to look at the future and suggest how your treatment is going to be a game changer in the clinic and how you are going to actually improve upon the treatment that you are suggesting. At the end, again, very important, conflicts of interest and acknowledgements. Now, these two are very different things, but are very, very important while you are reading a paper, because the conflicts of interest clearly tells you the affiliations or a particular, whether the authors are affiliated to a particular institution or to a particular sponsored company who are sponsoring the trial. So there might be conflicts of interest like this. And acknowledgements, all the authors or all the things might not be enlisted within the initial part, and you need to acknowledge some people at this point. So now let us come back to the discussion of the trial that we have been discussing throughout, the cetuximab plus RT trial. So this is the first trial to show a survival advantage associated with the use of a molecular targeted agent with radiation in locally advanced head and neck. The benefits were achieved without prohibitive infield toxic effects. So there was not gross discontinuation of radiation, which is the principal treatment. Moreover, cetuximab did not adversely affect the timely completion of radiation, which was very important, because you know that accelerated repopulation is a problem. Late toxicities were not in excess of the chemoradiation, and the addition of radiation seemed to be better when altered fractionation was being used. Coming to the limitations of the trial, this is again very important. So the first limitation, and these were mentioned by the authors themselves. So there is no head-to-head comparison with chemoradiation, and this is unfortunately what remains till now, excepting one well-conducted trial, which was again done by the RTOG group, but predominantly in the post-operative setting. The greatest benefit, as I've already discussed, was with altered fractionation, not what we do routinely. The RT regimes were not standardized. Non-conformal radiation was used, typically 2B, but the authors argued that that was the standard at that point of time. Fixed dose of the drug was used, which was something a little bit interesting. And the long-term overall survival data was not available. Locoregional control was used as an endpoint, which in a curative setting might not be the appropriate endpoint to use. In conclusion, they said that cetuximab plus radiotherapy was superior to radiotherapy alone, and it represented a new therapeutic approach to locally advanced head and neck cancers, and provided a foundation for additional studies. Bear this in mind. They are not only claiming that this is a new standard, they are saying that it provides the path to newer studies with this molecule. In the absence, well-designed trials comparing this regimen to chemo radiotherapy are warranted. Unfortunately, many have not been done, but that is another story. In the absence of these comparisons, look at the conclusion carefully. Physicians and patients should discuss the risks and benefits of each regimen on an individualized basis. This was written 15 years ago and remains absolutely valid even today when we discuss this with our patients in the clinic. And of course, this did change practice, especially for patients who are ineligible for using cisplatin as a drug. So the penultimate slide that I have is basically a practical slide about doing the presentations, because I've had numerous queries from residents, especially when they're looking at trials and how to cut and paste parts of a PDF file. So this is simply nothing related to doing a journal club, but just showing you how to do it in case you do not. So when you open a PDF file, you have the edit option and you take a snapshot from that. This is how you toggle and take a snapshot. And after that, you right click and you have an option of copy selected graphic, which you can simply paste onto your PowerPoint presentation. So I hope my presentation, which has been very, very basic, has been of some help to the residents who have joined. And I hope that you would be coming out with much better presentations than what I have done today in the very short time. I would end with this slide, again reiterating the fact that we have a journal of our own because we are discussing Journal Club. And more importantly, the manuscript submission is now open. So I invite all of them to contribute to this cause. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you so much for that great teaching. And I think we can have some question answer after the JC Pro is over. So now, without further delay, I would like to invite Dr. Anupam Datta for the next for our first JC Pro session, that is the Rapido trial. So Anupam, you may start, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. Thank
you. Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot, West Bengal chapter of AROI, and thank you indeed, Abhishek Da, for making things a little bit easier for me, and also a little bit tough also, because 2-3 of my slides have not been according to what you presented, but I would still stick to the ethos of this journal club. Now, before I start off, I would like to give a small disclaimer that I am at the mercy of my network over here. So just in case my voice is scrapping or anything, please do let me know. If I am not being, if I'm not hearing also, then Jibokda, please do give me a call. That won't be a problem. Okay. So the trial I'm being given to present today is the Rapido trial. Now, what is the Rapido trial? Now, Rapido trial is the short course radiotherapy followed by chemotherapy before total mesorectal excision versus preoperative chemoradiotherapy TME, and optional adjuvant chemotherapy in locally advanced rectal cancer. I would just make it a little simple. Rapido stands for rectal cancer and preoperative induction therapy, followed by dedicated operation. So this trial was published in Lancet Oncology on 7th of December 2020, and Dr. Hospers was the principal investigator of this particular trial. Now, just to give a brief outline that what exactly is Rapido. Now, Rapido is nothing but giving short course chemotherapy, short course radiotherapy, followed by chemotherapy, 6 or 9 cycles, followed by surgery. Now, I'll discuss about the trial in details. Now, in for CA rectum, what is the management that we are having? So first of all, what we do is we do an MRI for the locoregional staging and followed by a CT abdomen and thorax for the metastatic workup. For residents present in this forum, you should understand that you should never prescribe a PET CT upfront for CA rectum until and unless you are having symptoms which suggest the patient might have metastasized to bone or any other organ. Now, if the disease is on C1, CT1, T2, N0, then we don't give any new adjuvant therapy in rectum. If it is T3A, N0 and mesorectal fossa has not been involved, or T3A, N1 mesorectal fossa not involved, we give either short course RT or new adjuvant chemo RT based on our institutional protocol. And if it is a CN2 disease or a threatened CRM or a threatened mesorectal fossa, we give NACTRT, or the last one, something called the TNT, or the total neoadjuvant therapy. Now, total neoadjuvant therapy is something that we are going to discuss today. And after that, what happens is the surgery. So if it's a CT1, T2, we go for an upfront surgery. If it's a T3A, CRM not threatened, then we give any CTRT or a short course RT followed by surgery. Or if it's the MRF is threatened, then we give a NACTRT or a total neoadjuvant therapy followed by surgery. Now the background of this trial. Now, so the standard practice in a CT3 plus disease is NACTRT, as I've already said, 45 gray and 25 fraction, or 50 gray up to 50.4 gray and 28 fraction with capecitabine, or a short course RT, 5 gray into 5 fractions, depending upon the mesorectal fossa involvement. The NACTRT aim, neoadjuvant chemoradiation aim, you should always remember, is improved locoregional control. And from this paper, the locoregional relapses with NACTRT has been 5 to 9%. But the problem that we have faced in all our locally advanced rectal cancer trial is we had more of systemic relapses than local relapses. Now, this is what has triggered the investigators to go into this trial. So the Rapido trial is mainly aimed to reduce distant metastasis without compromising locoregional control, because systemic relapse has been a major problem in all locally advanced rectal cancers. So the Rapido hypothesis. Now this hypothesis is the approach might result in decreased number of distant metastases without increasing the risk of locoregional failure, ultimately improving survival outcomes. And this was based on the Dutch M1 trial. And this Dutch M1 trial was published in the Annals of Surgical Oncology. Now, what was this trial? This was just in brief. It was as you are seeing, it's M1. It was a stage 4 cancer was the eligible criteria, and the patients received short course RT5 gray into 5 fractions, followed by 2 cycles of Capox-Bev, then another 4 cycles of Capox-Bev, followed by evaluation and then surgery of the primary as well as the metastasis. And what happened with that trial was that the 2-year overall survival rate in a metastatic CA rectum was 80%, while the 2 years recurrence rate was 64% after a R0 resection. So you can see that even in this setting also, it was the distant relapses which was a more problematic. So this is what was based. The Dutch M1 trial is the primary crux based on which this Rapido is based. So the Rapido trial endpoints, we have the primary and the secondary endpoints. So the primary endpoint was disease-related treatment failure at 3 years. So what it meant was, it meant at 3 years, the first occurrence of a locoregional failure or distant metastasis or a new colorectal primary or treatment related death. So these all were in the primary endpoint and they were clubbed as a disease related treatment failure at 3 years. While the secondary endpoints were completion rate of neoadjuvant therapy, toxicity, R0 resection rate and resection margin, they set it at more than 1 millimeter. Then pathological complete response rate, surgical complications within 30 days of surgery, functional outcome, local recurrence, overall survival, and quality of life. So these all were the secondary endpoints of the study. So the methods, the study design, and the participants work. This was an investigator-driven, open-label phase 3 randomized trial. It was multicentric and it was between 21st June 2011 to 2nd June 2016. Accrued 920 patients with 462 patients in experimental group and 450 of them in standard of care group. It was had a median follow-up of 4.6 years with an intent to treat analysis type of statistics. The criteria. Now, what was the inclusion and exclusion criteria? So the inclusion criteria, it had to be more than 18 years of age, more than or equal to. They had to be biopsy proven, newly diagnosed, primary locally advanced rectal carcinoma, adenocarcinoma. Distal extension had to be less than 16 centimeters from the anal verge, and pelvic MRI with at least one of the following high risk criteria, which were either it had to be a T4A or a T4B disease, there had to be extramural vascular invasion, CN2, mesorectal fossa involved, or enlarged lateral lymph nodes considered to be metastatic. While the exclusion criteria were if the growth was an extensive growth of the rectal tumor into cranial part of sacrum involving the lumbosacral roots, or if it was an upfront metastatic disease. So these cases were excluded from the trial. So, and I acknowledge Dr. Kanu for this particular slide, very nicely written. And this was what Rapido gave. Now, the Rapido gave the radiologist the format to do the MRI in this particular format. And it was for the primary, the tumor height from the anorectal junction had to be reported, morphology of the tumor, depth of extramural spread, presence or absence of extramural vascular invasion and grading, mesorectal fossa involvement, breach of peritoneal reflection by the tumor. This was for the primary tumor, and for the node, presence or absence of mesorectal or extramesorectal lymph node metastasis, mesorectal lymph nodes with short axis diameter of more than 10 millimeter and round. So anything less than that, no. Short axis 5 to 9 millimeter and meeting at least two of round shape, either an irregular border or heterogeneous signal intensity. And lastly, the node had to be with an irregular border or heterogeneous signal intensity, or both, or round lymph node with a short axis diameter of more than 10 millimeter, or a combination of these, which were considered to be metastatic. So we understand that whenever we study the type of a metastatic lymph node, we all should always remember, junior residents, that the lymph nodes have the first change that happens in a metastatic lymph node is the change of shape from an elliptical to round. So this is very, very important. So this is what they have exactly told in these reporting guidelines to the radiologist by this Rapido group. So the Rapido arms, what were the two arms? Now, this upper arm is the standard arm. So the standard arm involved 5.5 weeks of NACT-RT, followed by 8 weeks plus minus 2 weeks gap, followed by surgery, and then adjuvant chemotherapy after a gap of 6 to 8 weeks. The adjuvant chemotherapy was a 24 weeks chemotherapy, and mind you, it was optional. It involved 8 fractions Kpox or 12 cycles of Folfox. While the main arm that we're going to study today is the experimental arm. The experimental arm had short course RT given over a period of 8 days, then 11 to 18 days of gap, then 18 weeks of chemotherapy, which would be either 3 weekly 6 cycles of Kpox or 2 weekly 9 cycles of Folfox. Then we give 2 to 4 weeks of gap, and then the surgery is completed. So the experimental arm of Rapido involved in a neoadjuvant short course RT followed by neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by surgery. So we call it total neoadjuvant treatment followed by surgery. So trial population in brief, first of all, 920 patients were accrued, out of which the intent to treat population were 460 in the experimental group and 441 in the standard group, and the patients who were studied in the protocol were 423 and 398 respectively. The chemotherapy dose in where the Kpox 3 weekly capecitabine 1000 milligram per meter square twice daily on day 1 to 14, and oxaliplatin 130 milligram per meter square IV on day 1. Folfox was Folfox 4, and it was Q2 weekly, and it was oxaliplatin 85 milligram per meter square IV on day 1, followed by leucovorin 200 milligram per meter square IV on day 1 and day 2. And this was followed by a bolus 5-FU 400 milligram IV per meter square IV, and continuous infusion of 5-FU at 600 milligram per meter square for 22 hours on day 1 and day 2. The standard arm received 8 cycles Kpox or 12 cycles Folfox, while the experimental arm received neoadjuvant 6 cycles Kpox or 9 cycles Folfox. The radiotherapy protocol, the experimental arm, as I've already said, it is a 5 gray into 5 fraction administered over a maximum of 8 days. The standard, this was in the experimental arm, while the standard arm was received 50.4 gray in 28 fractions or 50 gray in 25 fractions EQD2 with concomitant twice daily capecitabine 825 milligram per meter square on all RT days, with optional field reduction after 45 gray or 46 gray, 2 gray per fraction. The target volume in both the groups, the CTV for radiotherapy included entire mesorectum with the primary tumor and relevant regional lymph nodes, with additional boost dose was optional, while the CTV or to the boost was accessible by the accessible tumor with a 1 centimeter margin within the same anatomical compartment as where the tumor is located. So this is the initially as we follow the CTV A and CTV B, and then the boost to the primary tumor. The surgery procedures as per the trial, they followed the total mesorectal excision principles, and a partial mesorectal excision was also accepted for proximal tumors. Open and lap approaches were allowed. Completeness of resection was assessed using residual tumor classification. Pathologic assessment of the resected sample was done according to the national guidelines of each participating country. Mind you, it was a multi-center trial, and included standardized workup and reporting. It involved the involvement of circumferential resection margins, quality of the sample, and the complete tumor response were recorded as a yes or a no. Quality of resection was assessed at two different levels for abdominoperineal excision and at one level for anterior resection, which is the mesorectum. The follow-up, the clinical assessments were done at 6, 12, 24, 36, and 60 months after surgery, including CEA measurement. The chest X-ray or CT thorax and USG or CT abdomen at 12 and 36 months were minimum done. Total colonoscopy was obligatory within the first year unless done preoperatively, and colonoscopy was mandatory 60 months postoperatively. Other diagnostic tests like PET-CT were only based on an indication basis to detect or confirm any recurrent disease. The statistical analysis, the statistics followed was an IBM SPSS statistics version 25. The aim was to detect a decrease in 3-year cumulative probability of disease-related treatment failure from 30% to 22.5%, corresponding to a hazard ratio of 0.715, power allocated 80%, and with an alpha error of 0.05. The analysis, as I've already told, is intended to treat, and the Kaplan-Meier comparison was used with the compared chi-square test and the student's t-test for the continuous data. Now the results. First of all, the baseline characteristics. Now, across both the groups, the comparison, it was all comparable. Both the groups were comparable. The experimental arm of 462 and standard arm for 450, they were all comparable in terms of sex, the median, the age of randomization, age category, across all the parameters assigned. Now, the first, as I've already said, the primary endpoint was disease-related total treatment failure. So the total treatment failure in between the experimental and the standard groups were totally in favor of the experimental group with a significant p-value of 0.019. The experimental group had showed a treatment failure rate of 23.7, while the standard arm had a failure rate of 30.4. Mind you, we are talking of a median follow-up period of 4.6 years. So at 4.6 years, the 3-year total treatment-related failure was 23.7% in the experimental arm and 30.4% in the standard arm. So this was statistically significant as per the p-value. The distant metastasis again favored the experimental arm with 20%, and while standard arm having 26.8%, and it was favoring at a p-value of less than 0.05. So just I would like to give a brief highlight that what initially I told that the trial wanted to talk about reducing distant metastasis at the without compromising loco-regional control. So the distant metastasis strongly favored the experimental arm here. So the distant metastases were less in the experimental arm. The local failure rates in the experimental arm and in the standard arm were not different. Now there you can see a tendency towards increase in the experimental arm, but mind you, it was not statistically significant. While the overall survival, it was same in both the arms at 3 years. Now we are talking of a 3-year overall survival over here, because the trial didn't go on to 5-year time frame. So we are talking of 3-year overall survival, and the 3-year overall survival, there was no difference after a median follow-up of 4.6 years. The surgery outcome across both the arms, now after giving a total neoadjuvant therapy and after giving any CTRT, were same in both the arms, in the experimental as well as in the standard of care arm. The with the 92% and 89% being in both the arms respectively, which showed that the curative intent of surgery, if it was possible within 6 months of the end of preoperative treatment, the answer was yes, it was possible in both the arms. While now, disease-related treatment failure, again, you will see it is the distant metastasis which is more than the loco-regional failure. So the patients, they tend to fail systemically than locally. So in the experimental arm, 67% failed in systemically, while 81% failed in the standard arm in terms of systemic involvement, with a significant p-value of 0.19. which showed that the distant metastasis was significantly less in the experimental arm. The pathologic response, now this is very important, pathological complete response, and this is where the experimental arm has shown that it is just double the standard arm with a very, very high rate of significance. So the PCR rates were double compared to the standard arm. And if the PCR rate is high, then remember the micrometastasis is low and the overall survivals automatically go up. Very important, wait and watch policy. What is wait and watch policy? No surgery. When do we do no surgery? If there is a clinico-radiological complete response, and out of these 2 patients, 14 patients in the experimental arm chose to wait and watch, while 11 patients in the standard arm chose to wait and watch, which showed that 14 patients had a clinico-radiological complete response, out of whom 1 failed locally and 2 failed systemically, while in the standard arm, 1 failed locally and 1 failed systemically. So it also opened up another, road, or it opened up the box of if organ preservation can be considered in rectal cancers. Now the adverse events or the secondary endpoints, the adverse events, the higher rate of grade 3 were the expected adverse events, diarrhea, anything related to that we have usually with our bimodality therapy of chemotherapy and radiation therapy. There were no unexpected side effects. Diarrhea, grade 3 diarrhea were the most common in the experimental arm, followed by neurotoxicity and wound related vascular events. See, the neurological toxicity, as you can see, grade 3 toxicities were significantly higher in the experimental arm, while diarrhea was the most common GI side effect in the experimental arm, and that too the grade 3 diarrheas were very, very common. The authors say that the one of the causes of diarrhea could also be delaying surgery after neoadjuvant radiation therapy. So the summary of the results, there were 7% lower disease-related treatment failure in the treatment arm, in the test arm or the rapido arm. The 7% lower distant metastasis again in the experimental arm of total neoadjuvant therapy. Doubling in pathological complete response rate in favor of the experimental arm. There was similar overall survival, 3-year overall survival in each of the arms. Higher grade 3 toxicities in experimental arm, diarrhea being most common. However, cause of diarrhea could also be due to delayed surgery, and there were no differences in surgical or post-operative complications in both the arms. The QOL data is still awaited for this Rapido trial. So the conclusion, what Rapido said was, the Rapido trial shows that short course radiotherapy followed by 18 weeks of chemotherapy before surgery decreases the probability of disease-related treatment failure in high-risk locally advanced rectal cancer, thereby reducing the probability of distant metastasis, number one. Number two, there was a high rate of pathological complete response, paving the way for organ preservation. Then number three, there was high compliance and tolerability to the Rapido arm, while lastly, the treatment should be considered as a new standard of care for patients with high-risk locally advanced rectal cancers. So now coming to the discussion part, which is very important, that now where do we stand in locally advanced rectal cancers? Now we have to weigh our option between our treatment strategies and what do we expect out of them. In the treatment strategies, we as clinicians day to day, we are looking for optimal sequencing, like what to follow after what. Surgery, radiation of followed by chemo, chemo followed by radiation, chemo RT, then de-escalation strategies of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, like reducing the number of cycles of chemotherapy, reducing the number of hypofractionating radiation schedules, time gap between RT and surgery, optimizing what exactly should be the time gap between radiation therapy and surgery. Then, of course, very important, the total treatment duration, because compliance at the end of the day is extremely, extremely important. While our expectations, we want a good local control, we want a very high pathological complete response, we want less distant metastasis rate, we want increased overall survival, and also an improved quality of life. Now this is our expectation from, leave alone rectal cancers, from any cancer modality. This is what we want. So where does the Rapido stand? Very important, organ preservation. Because right now, till now, we have had organ preservation approaches in bladder sparing surgery treatment. We had larynx sparing treatments. Now we are looking into a newer horizon of organ preservation in CA recti. So the Rapido, now what I'll do is I'll dissect how the trial has gone by. Okay. Now, if you see this, the lower arm is the total neoadjuvant treatment arm. If you look into the total neoadjuvant treatment arm, you will see there is the shorter duration of chemo. Okay, what is the basis of the shorter duration chemo? We shall discuss. What is the basis of neoadjuvant short course RT? We'll discuss that as well. What is the rationale between of timing of chemotherapy? And very important, how much time interval should be given after completion of neoadjuvant modality and surgery. So coming to the first part is the short course chemo RT, and Rapido derives its basis of short course chemotherapy from the Scott trial. The Scott trial was given after stage 3 surgery colon cancers. Patients were given 3 months of Capox or Folfox in one arm and 6 months of Capox Folfox in the other arm. And what the results were, the 3 months of Capox in stage 3 colon was non-inferior to 6 months Capox, but the 3 months of Folfox was actually inferior to 6 months of Folfox. So these days what we do is, if it's a stage 3 colon cancer, then we usually upfront operated, we prefer giving 3 months of Capox. Then comes the basis of a new adjuvant short course RT, and the Rapido derives the results of the Stellar trial and the Polish 2 trial. And if you see the the Stellar trial, which was NACT-RT 45 fraction followed by surgery, and short course RT followed by 4 cycles Capox followed by surgery and then 2 cycles Capox, while the Polish 2 gives NACT-RT and then short course RT followed by 3 cycles Folfox and surgery. The pathological complete responses in Stellar trial, Rapido trial, and Polish trial were in favor of the blue columns, which is nothing but the experimental arm. The loco-regional relapses were higher in the again in the new adjuvant short course RT arm, except in the Rapido trial, where we have had more loco-regional relapses, but that is not significant. Disease-free survival rates were higher in the short course RT arm, the total neoadjuvant therapy arm, while the overall survivals were pretty much the same across all the arms in Stellar and Polish. Another trial that Rapido is based showed derives its relevance from is the Stockholm 3 trial, and the Stockholm 3 trial, the pathological response was seen in the short course RT followed by delayed surgery. So it was shown that the pathological complete response was 29% over 10.4%, and it was associated with superior survival. Now coming to the timing of chemo. Now, how should we place chemo in relation to surgery and in relation to radiotherapy? And this is where the trial, an extremely well conducted trial, the Prodige 23 trial that came upon, and this were the two arms. This is also a total neoadjuvant treatment trial, and this red trial is the red arm is the test arm, and this showed that the patients were given 6 cycles of modified FOLFIRINOX, the three drug chemo, and followed by NACT-RT, followed by surgery, and then again 6 cycles of additional modified FOLFOX 6. So modified FOLFIRINOX followed by modified FOLFOX 6. While the neoadjuvant, the standard arm was NACT-RT followed by TME followed by 12 cycles of Folfox or 8 cycles of Capox. And the results were totally in favor of the experimental arm, the total neoadjuvant therapy arm, which showed that the disease-free 3-year disease-free survival were higher. The metastasis-free survival was also higher. Non-curative surgery, complications rates were also lower, while the pathological complete response where you can see 27.8 versus 12.1%, while the grade 3, grade 4 toxicities were higher in the chemoradiotherapy arm, that is the standard arm. But the problem of this trial was the treatment duration was nearly 9 months. So if you spend 3/4 of your year in cancer therapy, you are bound to have decreased compliance rates. Now, next thing is the timing of surgery after neoadjuvant therapy. So surgery when to do, and this Grecar 6 trial gave way to Rapido trial, and it showed that if the surgery was delayed beyond 7 weeks, then the chances of morbidity was quite high. So longer the waiting period, higher was the morbidity and more difficult was the surgical resection. So based on these 3 criteria, Rapido trial developed shorter course of chemotherapy, then shorter course of RT, and of course 2 to 4 weeks time between completion of chemotherapy and radiation therapy. Now comes the role of adjuvant chemo after NSCTRT, and I acknowledge Dr. Jibak for this extremely wonderful presentation that he had made and shared with me. And this was a meta-analysis published in 2015, which showed that if the patients who were uh, treated with neoadjuvant NSCTRT followed by surgery, then for the YP, so you can see here, if it is a YP-TNM stage of 2 on 3 with R0 resection, then it is the difference between an adjuvant chemotherapy and observation is 0. So basically, adding adjuvant chemotherapy after a downstaged rectal cancer with NSCTRT is of no benefit until the tumor is located 10 to 15 centimeters above anal verge, that is, if it is a high rectal malignancy. Now, another trial, the meta-analysis again, this was published in 2019, and this also showed that if the patients achieved complete pathological complete response with neoadjuvant modality, then there is no role of adding adjuvant chemotherapy to such cases. So having said that, the Rapido had its own set of limitations. The first limitation was that despite Rapido giving the guidelines to the radiologist to how to report a rectal cancer, there was an absence of a central review of the baseline MRIs. Next, the primary endpoint was disease-free treatment, the disease-related treatment, disease-related treatment relapse, and this was actually an altered primary endpoint. Initially, the trial was started with a primary endpoint of disease-free survival, but in course of time, they had changed the primary endpoint to disease-free treatment failure, and this was actually undesirable. The chemotherapy was not similar in both the arms because they had not clearly mentioned as to whom to give. It was not standardized as to who should receive Capox and who should receive Folfox. Radiation therapy, though it was mentioned, but the radiation techniques delivered was again not standardized. The overall survival rates were mentioned at 3 years. Not all patients in the standard arm received adjuvant chemotherapy. Mind you, I have already mentioned that adjuvant chemotherapy in the standard arm wasn't optional, while there is no subset analysis of Capox and the Folfox arms. Now, the comments regarding this particular Rapido trial again came up in Lancet, and they said that although this regimen had helped reduce rates of local recurrence to less than 5% of systemic failures, 5% rates of systemic failures were still high, and it was in the tune of 20 to 30%, which leading to a 5-year overall survival of 75% at the best that was calculated. And they said that the interim restaging MRI scan after 3 cycles of chemotherapy can potentially identify this group of patients who are non-responders to pre-op treatment, thus potentially prompting an earlier surgery than planned. So this is very important that, it was not mentioned that after an interim MRI scan should be done. So if we had an interim MRI scan done after 3 cycles, then we could have promptly taken up a surgery. The Greker trial, which did not find any benefit in rates of pathological complete response beyond 7 weeks after radiotherapy, but here, after radiotherapy, we gave another 18 weeks of chemotherapy. Having said that, the chemotherapy might have just added to the increased pathological complete responses. So we are not very sure whether the base, putting the basing the trial on the Greker findings, whether 7 weeks was an optimum or not, because we have included chemotherapy after neoadjuvant RT, short course RT, and we found very higher complete response rates. While the Prodigy trial is the only other trial to our knowledge that has shown promising results with total neoadjuvant therapy, although this induction regimen was well tolerated in the trial setting, the general tolerability of modified FOLFIRINOX in the population is still unknown. Very important. Now, let's finish it off with this particular slide. What has Rapido achieved? Now we have spoken of the short course chemotherapy, and it has achieved that there was that 3 months of Kpox was non-inferior to 6 months Kpox. So short course chemo can be added. Rapido stands in favor of that, yes. The short course RT Rapido has achieved everything, whatever the other trials have achieved. Increased PCR in Stellar, decreased distant medicine Polish 2, and increased PCR in Stockholm. It also achieved similar results of a Prodige 23 by giving increased pathological complete responses, increased 3-year DFS, and decreasing 3-year metastasis-free survivals. The Grecar trial gave the shorter interval as to decrease morbidity of surgical morbidity, but here we have added chemotherapy after the neoadjuvant short course RT, and so we have been able to get a higher pathological complete response. But if you see, what we can say is that in COVID-19 implications, with Rapido arm of total neoadjuvant therapy, we can have lesser number of hospital visits. So we can say that lesser number of hospital visits, increased compliance, increased pathological complete responses, decreased distant metastasis free survival, which might as well translate to overall survival. That remains a question that I cannot comment upon. Lastly, a newer horizon, whether organ preservation can be considered or not. I'll finish with this, and I acknowledge Dr. Kanu Charan Patro, an excellent academician in radiation oncology. I also acknowledge some of the slides from Dr. Indranil Malik, Dr. Jeevak Bhattacharjee, and also the entire team of West Bengal AROI for having me selected for this particular topic. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Anupam, for that excellent talk. And so we have done our first JC Pro successfully. And so I would like to ask the audience if there is any question. You can please type the question in the chat box so that we have our speaker to answer. And anyone can ask.
Jeevok, can I just make another comment? I see from the, because this journal club, this is the first edition of the journal club, and this was put together quite hurriedly. We did not have a very, a very robust format for this. I see in the attendance, and that is very heartening, a number of our seniors, some of our teachers are also there. So I would just request that if any of them have questions or comments, which I think are very important, so could they please raise their hands, and then we could actually unmute them. Jeevok or Suranjan could do that.
Yes, sure.
So that they can actually go ahead and ask the questions, because we don't have any formal discussions for this.
Yeah. So Dr. Shovik, you can ask. Shall I unmute you?
Yeah, Anishda has asked a question. When was the time to disease-related treatment, disease-related failure, free survival calculated from? It was from the time of randomization.
Okay, Anupam, I have just one comment from for this Rapido trial.
Yes.
Initially, this Rapido trial mainly the reciprocation of the Stockholm 3 trial, nothing more than that. What the Stockholm 3 trial has been done, it is the short course therapy and go for a delayed surgery.
Delayed surgery, yes.
So they have taken this time as consideration that you put some chemotherapy in here.
Yes.
So that there might be some decrease in the distant meds and everything. So ultimately they found this result. What they have thought regarding these things, I mean, they ultimately found the result. Another comment is that regarding the timing of the surgery, what you have already mentioned, that is much more very important. That is, there are few trials have been done between the, there is some disturbance. Hello?
Someone.
Hello.
Those who are not asking the question or talking, kindly mute yourselves.
Okay. Another thing is that the time, the interval of the surgery. Few trials have been done where they have categorized this interval of surgery between 6 to 8, 8 to 11, more than 11. So in maximum case, it has been seen that between 8 to 11 weeks, if the surgery has been done, then there is the maximum benefit of the pathological complete response. More than 11 weeks, there is not much pathological complete response. Rather, there is much more morbidity after this, for this time gap. So this is the important thing, that here also, I think,
Yes.
near about, yeah.
Yeah, the thing is that
Please.
you're totally correct point on. What they have said is that, the timing between completion of the, it's not about radiotherapy, it's about completion of the new adjuvant modality of treatment. So they took the relevance from two trials. One is the Stockholm 3 and the Grecar 6 trial. They also mentioned the forward trial in some areas, but it was the Grecar 6 and the Stockholm 3 trials where they found that if surgery is delayed beyond 7 weeks of interval, then there could be increased surgical morbidity or difficulty of surgery.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yes.
they have, in records, they have two time interval is there. One is more than 7 and one is more than 11. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there are not other very well mentioned or well formed trial was there, but there are few trials where they have categorized the interval. I mean, 5 to 7, 7 to 9, 9 to 11. So like this way, they have categorized it.
Yes.
They have shown here that within this, 7 to 9, this is the maximum benefit of the pathological response. That is also from the Gregat trials, obviously, but they have categorized this one. And another comment regarding this after the pathological complete response observation, that is the, next gen.
Yes, that is what is the
Convention.
newer horizon. I have already said, like as
Absolutely.
Obhishek was asking, that is it pointing towards any future direction? So we have any given day a patient would want an organ sparing approach, right? So what this has given away is like a wait and watch policy. If there is a clinical radiological complete response, not a pathological, then it is up to the patient whether they want to wait and watch.
The only problem is that they should have some robust follow-up
No.
after.
They are not commenting anything. It's just that they have this many of patients who have actually, it was actually not a part of the trial also. It is just which has ended up incidentally, which patients have chosen themselves. And they found that
Okay.
of the 11 and 14 patients who have chosen in both the arms to stay without surgery, two patients in each arms had, systemic and local relapses. That's it.
So I think there are a couple of participants who have raised their hands, and probably they could be
Hello,
asked to talk.
Dr. Shobik Pal here.
Yeah, sure. Tell me.
My two questions are there.
Yes.
One is whether the pathological complete response is related to the chemotherapy as shown in the trial or related to the delayed response assessment after the radiation. As in the short course it was
Yeah. What is your next question?
done previously. Now it is the response has been done after chemotherapy. And my second question is, if after chemotherapy, short course RT followed by chemotherapy, and still patient is inoperable, then what is the treatment of mode of treatment?
Okay, fine. So number one, the question is if the pathological complete response can be attributed to addition of chemotherapy. Now, this is what the authors have said, that addition of chemotherapy could be one of the reasons, and they have not told with their hands on their chest that this is due to chemotherapy, because after completion of neoadjuvant radiotherapy of 5 grays, 5 fractions, you see the chemotherapy was given over a period of 18 weeks. So between radiation and surgery, there is 18 weeks gap, and we cannot let that happen. Already the Greca trial has shown that more than 7 weeks, we are increasing the morbidity. So it is very well worthwhile that adding chemotherapy might have further downstage the tumor. That is what they are planning to say. And the second question, what if the patients remained inoperable even after these two techniques? Now, if the patients remained inoperable, they were a part of the disease-related treatment failure. They were added in that. And
Okay, I
eventually,
think
and
Onishda has some question to ask.
yes, Anushka.
Onishda, please go ahead. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, I got one question. The question is from Firdausi, and she asks that, sir, did they use MRI after 3 cycles of Kpox, or did you say it would have been better? I missed that part. Okay, now see, the trial protocol did not mention about using an interim MRI. This is what that was a part of the, a part of the criticism that the trial people themselves have shown, but they did it. Only thing is that that was not documented. And what's important was that there was lacking of any central committee or a central team which would revise all the MRIs. And I have a question here from Arindam, who asks that, is organ preservation an option after neoadjuvant CTRT if the initial disease burden involved the sphincter, but there is considerable shrinkage post CTRT such that the tumor has shrunk away from the scene? See, the thing is that we are light years far away even about thinking about this organ preservation approach in CA rectum, because right now we don't have any robust data, or even for that matter, even any phase 2 data which suggests that organ preservation approach is there or not. There is a trial called the OPERA trial, and there is an organ preservation database which you can see, but that is only after taking a high risk consent for the patient. But that is not a part of any literature that suggests that organ preservation can be considered after clinico-radiological complete response.
Anupam,
Yeah.
I have a comment regarding the question of Dr. Firdaus, but he mentioned that after 3 cycle of the Kpox, is it any requirement of the MRI? Because after the radiation,
Yes, that
near
is
about
what.
9 weeks, after the 9 weeks of completion of the radiation, we have to go for assessment and go for the surgery. So after the 3 cycle of the Kpox, so we are not ultimately taking this response evaluation after that only, na? After
Yes.
completion of it, we go for this
After 6 cycles
total,
of Kpox, it's basically
exactly,
18 weeks,
exactly.
6 cycles of Kpox, and not 3 cycles
Exactly.
of Kpox.
Anupam, I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
The basic problem, all these questions are coming, is that this trial I tried to answer 2 questions with one trial. One question is whether adding neoadjuvant chemotherapy is better than adjuvant, and whether short course is better than long course.
Right.
So because all this confusion is coming, because they've clubbed 2 things to get an answer, but whatever it is, the answer, the results are quite promising.
Yes.
And only thing is that there is a question whether if there is a decreased compliance of adjuvant chemotherapy in the standard arm. So there has been question whether had there been full compliance of adjuvant radiotherapy, and which was dependent on the institution which was treating, would that trial result would have been different. So that was the only question of that is still unanswered.
Yes, that is the thing. Even before that, the answer is in that whether adjuvant chemotherapy is even needed or not.
Whether helpful or not.
Or not, yes. Then comes the compliance. Now, the thing is that the Prodige 23 trial, which involved total neoadjuvant therapy and followed by surgery, and then again 6 cycles of modified FOLFOX 4, it was a 9-month long, it was a 35-week long treatment. Okay. So if a patient, what the author says that if a patient spends 35 weeks out of 52 weeks in a year, then there is bound to be decreased compliance rates, and compliance rate is actually a secondary endpoint of Rapido trial as well.
No, my question is different. You are giving radiation in one arm, and there is a lot of chemotherapy in one arm. You are giving the radiotherapy, chemotherapy are given before, one after. Okay. So what is the exact role of chemotherapy here, adjuvant chemotherapy or neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and what is the exact role of radiation, which is decreasing what? That is the confusion, na?
Yes,
so,
yes.
So the answer the why the confusion is there. We don't know whether giving the total adjuvant before surgery or giving short course and waiting is acting resulting in better outcome.
Right.
So, Anupam, if I don't think there are other questions pending, so can I just make a few comments to draw a conclusion of what you have
100%,
so
100%.
nicely presented? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
very nice
just to
presentation, Anupam.
just to put things in perspective, especially for the residents, I think it's important to first understand that just like many other solid tumors, organ preservation has been a very important point for looking at locally advanced rectal cancer. And the talk of whether the better approach would be neoadjuvant treatment followed by surgery versus surgery followed by adjuvant treatment actually dates back a very long time. If I'm not mistaken, in 2003 or 4, when the German rectal cancer study group from Rolf Saur, who's a great surgeon, he came out with this trial which actually compared these two approaches and found that the rectal preservation rates were far higher in the neoadjuvant and without compromising on the efficacy outcome. So the next important thing, which I think is going to be the future of oncology, is the total neoadjuvant treatment approach. Now, this is not limited only to this particular trial. There have been a number of other trials that have actually looked at this. And I think the best model that we can consider here is breast. The reason why this has become so important to us is because we now understand that there is a clear correlation of pathologic complete response with overall survival. Now, this is very important even for residents to understand that pathological complete response has a direct correlation with overall survival in a number of solid tumors, including rectum, and thereby achieving a pathologic complete response becomes tantamount. Now, when we were students and we were using only short course radiation or chemoradiation, we were typically achieving, as Anupam has rightly showed, pathologic complete response in the range of 10 to 15% at best. And now you are trying to push it up towards 30%. So that is a significant improvement. And we know that if we do that, it's not only organ preservation that is important, but also the survival is going to be impacted because of the potential micrometastasis that occurs right from the inception, and thereby you have the benefit in distant metastasis-free survivals. But the problem, I think, which lies here is what is the best approach of this total neoadjuvant treatment. So whether it should be, there is no fact denying that it should be an optimal combination of radiation and chemotherapy, but what should be the optimal sequencing? And as of now, unfortunately, other than, I think, a Polish trial, which was a phase 2, which actually looked at both these approaches, that is starting with the chemotherapy, then the chemoradiation or the radiation. Let us talk about the radiation. Both the arms were possibly not short course, it was the long course chemoradiation, or starting with radiation, then giving the chemotherapy, and comparing these two head on, we would not have the correct answer. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was one phase 2 trial which actually looked at that, and they had a conclusion in that trial that starting with the chemotherapy could actually be a little bit better in terms of compliance, not in terms of the efficacy, but in terms of compliance. Now, the question that next comes is mainly generated from the Stockholm 3 trial, which tells us that a short course followed by a long gap is probably a good option to go ahead in rectal cancer, which was previously not thought of, because it was short course followed by short gap and long course followed by a long gap. Now, this trial has done something very intelligent. It has actually increased the gap from the short course. It has made it longer by interpolating chemotherapy in that space, but probably they have given the gap too long. That is the point that Kostov was trying to raise in his talk. And other than this, one thing probably which Anupam you did not mention is to look at the perioperative morbidity, which was also assessed in this particular trial, and which, if I remember correctly, was assessed by something which is known as the Clavien-Dindo grading. And it was found that
yes, absolutely.
Yes, so the perioperative blood loss, the perioperative morbidity was significantly higher in the Rapido trial in spite of the excellent results. And this tells me as a clinician that probably the gap was too long. Now, one thing needs to be made very clear, that the gap is from the ending of radiation to the date of surgery. It's not from the ending of total neoadjuvant therapy to surgery. The complications matter from the end of radiation to surgery, which here is more than 20 weeks. because you have the entire chemotherapy, a short gap of about 2 weeks prior to and after the ending of chemotherapy. So this probably could be a detriment to why you are having this problem. And maybe I would, at least that would be my wish, that a trial is designed later where you actually have the neoadjuvant chemotherapy first, followed by short course and a more or less reasonable gap, and then you go for surgery, which Kaustubh was just talking about. So this is probably one thing that we could look at, because as a clinician, although the overall survival part is important, overall survival or disease-free survival is important, but I would think that local control would also be a very important factor, especially for quality of life of patients in a curative setting. And the fact that local control was not very much better with this approach in the Rapido trial is a spot of bother in an otherwise well-conducted trial. And the last point that I have to make regarding this comment regarding this trial is that although this has been designed in a very robust fashion, the concepts of short course CAPOX is again something which is not new. You talked about the Scott trial, but I think a far more important trial in this regard would be from Cologne, which was by Professor Alex Brocchi, and more than 3,500 patients which talked about the same thing. And also, the concept of watchful waiting is also not something new, because you have a trial from Netherlands and another from Brazil, which are very old, I think more than 10 years old, which have actually looked at complete clinical response and robust follow-up with MR. So I think the optimal sequencing of treatment is what we would have to look at after having established that neoadjuvant therapy matters because it gives us higher PCR in rectum, and that it has to be a combination of chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And again, congratulations for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
Anupam, I think there's one last question from Orindam. Can you just let's go through it?
Yeah, the question
shall I read it?
Yeah, no, let me read. I can proceed. Although Rapido doesn't talk about an interim MRI, if there is a radiological and clinical complete response on assessment after 3 weeks of CAPOX post SCRT, is there any answer yet to what would be ideally done? Proceed with surgery or completion of 18 weeks of chemo? I mean, that is what they have said. I mean, if you have seen the present my presentation, they said that had there been an interim MRI, then that would have warranted a prompt surgery. That is what the exact line that has been written in the particular text of the article itself.
Lastly, just one short comment. Sorry. That thing is that after all this radiotherapy and chemotherapy neoadjuvant, some people having pathological complete response, some having no such. So we have to find out, this is just a, question of importance. We have to find out which type of people are having this pathological complete response.
Yes.
If we know this thing,
you're
if we know
right.
this thing, yeah.
Maybe we can find out, like, I mean, because the trial has been published after 4.6 years of a median follow-up. Now, we cannot comment on a particular patient's, the pathological complete response profile until it has at least crossed 5 years of time limit. And here in breast and all, we talk about 10-year survival rates, right? So it's very important that once we have an updated version and updated results of this, maybe 2 to 3 years down the lane, we can actually understand, maybe there could be a very good subset analysis of the patients, like who have achieved what factors have actually been responsible for not having a pathological complete response. That is an excellent point that you have pointed.
And just to add to that, Anupam, if you look at the trial population of the Rapido trial versus the Prodige trial, an interesting point is that in the Rapido trial, about 65% of the patients had actually T2 disease, whereas about 80% of the patients had T3 or higher disease in the PRODIGE trial, which tells me that the population in the PRODIGE was actually far worse. In
Yes.
spite of that, they actually had an identical amount of pathologic complete response. So it was almost a mirroring. So it was 23 versus 12 in the PRODIGE and 28 versus 14 in
14.
Rapido.
Yes. Yes.
So that is also something which Kostov rightly points out. So look at the trial population while we are interpreting the results.
So can we, do we have any other questions, or can we just call it a day, maybe?
I think we should wrap up.
Yeah.
Jivokda, are you there? I think
Yes.
Jivokda is not here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so
thank you everyone. And we will announce our next date of JC soon. And I will also like to invite you for the next CME we have on 23rd next week. So thank you and good night to all. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.